What happens when one man tries to watch all the horror films of the 1980s? Well, we're about to find out because I'm your host, Josh Spiegel, and this is the 80s Project. Welcome back to the 80s, and we are into 1985 now. That's right, this is the second episode of 1985, and the decade is in full swing. We are now firmly entrenched in all of the things that you think of when you think of the 80s, and horror is in its renaissance right now. Nightmare on Elm Street's already come out. We're already into like the thick of things. But this episode represents a little bit of a new beginning for the genre. Let's begin with the film that was from Switzerland, although it first debuted sometime in February at the Berlin International Film Festival, and it's After Darkness. There's two little brothers, Lawrence and Peter, and they witness something with their mother, although one of them witnesses it as something with broken glass, and also his brother disappearing into the sand. They're both adults now, and one of them is an elephant man, and the other is a warlock. Lawrence attempts suicide and is institutionalized, which distresses Peter to the point that he barely blinks when he's almost killed in an accident. Peter is a professor and he's upset with how they're tending to his brother and believes that he can do a better job, so he takes him into his care. Seems that Lawrence blames most of his issues on someone named Jan and has a hard time adjusting to a freer life with his brother. Meanwhile, Peter's work has him interview a little girl who seems to repeat the phrase that Lawrence says.
Do I stand before the king?
Seems that water is the trigger for Little Bro's episodes, and after all, they'll talk about how crappy the doctors were treating him. It only takes a day or two for Peter to start beating the crap out of him. A bit of jealousy leads to some dark dreams and a rift between Peter and his family as they reveal that Lawrence believes that Jan was his identical twin who died, although it's insisted that he never existed. Before long, his descent into madness escalates, although it's unclear exactly whose. So this one had a pair of directors. One was Sergio Guerres and the other was Dominique Othenin-Guirard. Now, it was both of their first films, and Sergio didn't do anything after this, but Dominique did. I guess someone saw this slow burn psychological thriller and was like, hey, what if this dude directed a Halloween film? And he went on to do Part 5, and I'm imagining that it was his idea to put the clown music in the scene with the cops. But he also did The Omen 4, and a bunch of TV movies, and even worked in a smaller capacity on Halloween Kills. And I'm imagining that it was his idea to have everyone say Evil Dies Tonight a million times. As far as I can tell, this didn't get any sort of US distribution at the time, and only had a VHS release much later on, and failed to make a dent on the film world. And this is a 2. I like a good slow burn, but this one doesn't go anywhere, and the plot is too obvious, so you're just sitting and waiting for them to get to the point. The horror cultural significance is only a 2 since it didn't get any attention over here at all, and no one really mentions this, but I'll give it the extra for launching Gerard into the horror world and featuring both Hurt and Sands. Should you watch it? I would say you could probably pass.
Sorry.
Let's go to the small screen for this next one, and it's a title that might sound familiar, even if this version isn't, because on February 7th, The Bad Seed took root. It starts with an old lady being pushed down the stairs, and I love that they literally freeze frame a cat, like it was like, hey, that's the lady that feeds me, you dick. Kung Fu Kane is here, and we meet little Rachel, and her mother is Molly Dodd. And her neighbor is one of the baby Janes. And Rachel is bummed out for not winning an award at school. She seems a bit bitchy and taunts the gardener, and on a school trip, she goes to the kid who won the medal, and hey, it's Sherman from Terror Vision, and she chases him. He's then missing, and they're at Paradise Cove, which is a pretty popular beach spot in Malibu, and is where the beach scene from the original X-Men movie was filmed. Oh, they then find Mark drowned, and Christine mentions that a number of people around them have died, including her father, and she starts to wonder about her daughter's mental well-being. Things ramp up when she's called into school, where they say that Rachel's behavior has been out of line and she's been up to a number of shenanigans. So they'll let her finish out the term, but she won't be allowed back the following year. Mark's family shows up too, and they want to know if Rachel took the medal and are clearly upset. But it all makes Christine start to doubt things, and she finds that medal in her daughter's things. She then discovers that it's very possible that her own mother was a known serial killer, and wonders if the trait and lack of any empathy has been passed down to her kid, and the two begin their own little battle of wits as mom has to decide what to do when it turns out her kid is a bad seed. This one is actually a remake of a film from 1956, and one I'll coincidentally be covering on the 50s Project in a really short period of time here. Both were adaptations of a book from 1954, and this one was a TV movie that was directed by Paul Wendkos, and almost all of his filmography is TV movies, but some horror stuff like the Mephisto Waltz, and his career spanned all the way from 1959 to 1999. The 50s version of the film had Patty McCormack as the Little Terror, and they offered her the role of the neighbor in this one, but she read the script and didn't care for it, so she turned it down. It says on IMDb that the original intention was to make this as a pilot for a series, but the execs said no, so they aired it as a movie of the week instead. Although I'm not completely convinced on this because there's not much in the way of info backing it up, and it doesn't really sound like something that would have been a series. And this is okay. It's a 2.5. It's fine and all, and it's a decent retelling of the story that's not hard to watch, but it's telling it in a fairly flat manner, with little tension or mood. The HCS is a 2, since it is a well-known story, but probably the least famous of the times that it was told. Should you watch it? Maybe? Honestly, I'd roll with one of the other adaptations instead. We're staying on the small screen now as we go forward about 2 weeks to February 21st, and we'll read ourselves some deadly messages. So, this girl Laura, who we saw not long ago in The Sword of the Sorcerer, is going on a date with her boyfriend, and her roommate, Cindy, finds an old Ouija board in the closet and decides to play it herself. And come on, how many times do I have to say this? You're not supposed to do that. And this is Sherry Stoner, and she's had one hell of a career. She acted in a bunch of stuff, but not much in the way of bigger roles. But then, since she was a member of the Groundlings, had a comedy writing background and started scripting animated shows like Tiny Toons Adventures, and she'd also do voices on those shows, and was a producer for Animaniacs. She contacts a spirit named David, but then someone comes into the apartment with dark gloves, and Laura comes home just in time to see someone murder her, and goes to get help, with the police arriving with Detective Sipowicz. But both Cindy and the killer are gone, and they don't believe her, although I'm not sure why they're so quick to dismiss it. Even Michael thinks Cindy's okay, so they just go on with their lives. Laura works at a dating agency and spots the killer at the mall, but things get weirder when another man approaches her and says he knows her, although she doesn't recognize him. Later, she does the Ouija herself and talks to a spirit named Mark, and faints, so she goes to see a doctor. Then it turns out that she gets fired for lying on her job application, and her school and old jobs say that they've never heard of her, but she insists she's telling the truth. Everything takes a big turn when it seems that there's a book series for kids that focus around a character named Laura Daniels, and every detail of Laura's life seems to have come straight from them. So, her entire life appears to be a lie, even though she insists it's all true. But what's going on? Who's the man trying to kill her? What's up with her fake memories? And what does that Ouija board have to do with all of this? And how does Clarence Boddicker factor in? Well, this is the first appearance on the project by Jack Bender, although we'll see more of him later this year. but he'd do more horror stuff in the 90s and is the man who brought us Child's Play 3. This one ran on ABC as a movie of the week, and there's not much behind the scenes info about this one or ratings information, but it doesn't appear to have been much in the way of a hit. I really like it though, so it's a 3.5 from me. First of all, there's no way to pin down this storyline. Just when you think you know what kind of movie it is, it switches things up, and where it ends up is a place you'll never see coming. Plus, for a TV movie, they did a good job loading up on atmosphere and created some nice tension. The significance is just a 1.5 though, since it's not much known, but it gets that extra 0.5 for having Bender involved and an assortment of stars in it. Should you watch it? Yep, decipher these messages.
Oh my God.
Get ready for some weird stuff now, because on February 22nd, up on the big screen, we decided to take a ride on the Night Train to Terror. It's on a train and there's a band playing a song.
Everybody's got something to do. Everybody but you. Come on and dance with me, dance with me. Dance with me, dance with me.
And that's not going to get stuck in my head like at all. But it looks like both God and the devil are also on the train, and Satan says that the train is meant to crash at dawn, and they're going to talk about the fates of 3 people and start to tell a story. We see a man and his wife driving, and he's being reckless, so they crash. Harry is then taken to a psychiatric hospital, and the doctors there drug him and hypnotize him and get him to lure people there, where he then operates on them and harvests their organs with the help of bull with hair? I think that's what's happening. It jumps around so much, and there's no narrative link to any of the scenes, so it doesn't make much sense, and I'll explain why later. One of the docs betrays the other because Fargo wants the whole operation to herself, and Harry is just a pawn in their games until he has plans of his own. And it's pretty crazy and just sort of ends. But it's just one segment, because this is an anthology, and God and Satan determine the punishment for all of the people involved in segment 1. But first, more music.
Everybody but you. Come on and dance with me, dance with me. Dance with me, dance with me.
Yep, it's the same song again. It's in there. We then go to the second story, and this girl is selling popcorn and gets picked up by an older man. And narration explains that she's Greta, a young musician, and is put into adult films, and one is seen by Glenn, who is obsessed with finding... Wait. Isn't this familiar? Yep, if you've been watching the project for a while, you'll recognize this as being a shortened version of the Death Wish Club. But they've cut so much of the storyline in order to just have the club stuff. So, when Greta shows up with short hair and men's clothing, you have no idea what the hell is going on. Keep in mind, the original film was 90 minutes, and this version is around 25 or so, which means that 2/3 of that film was just cut out. And it just literally ends, and the porter is like, Greta lived happily ever after. Instead of the ending that the film had, which is really weird. But before we get to that third story, we have to check in on the passengers.
Everybody's got something to do. Everybody but you.
Same song again. Well, it's not going to get stuck in my head again. You can be sure of that. You can be sure of that. But then there's the third story, and it's about a woman named Claire Hansen who has Nazi-themed nightmares, and then old Mr. Weiss sees a man on TV that sets him off. And Cameron Mitchell is here, and Weiss claims the man killed his family back in World War II and hasn't aged, and then he's killed. But then Richard Mall is here with hair again, very different hair, and once again, this should look familiar if you're a fan of the project, because this is also a truncated feature film that was called Cataclysm, which we covered back in 1980. Again, it's chopped down by about an hour, so it's mostly an incomprehensible mess. So this is really odd. It seems that the first segment was also a shortened feature, but one that wasn't finished and was called Scream Your Head Off. The other two films, Death Wish Club and Cataclysm, were both mentioned as being unreleased, even if they did have some brief theatrical play. Jay Schlossberg Cohen produced it and directed the wraparound segments, and his contributions to the film world were very limited. This was basically thrown together to take advantage of having access to this other footage that was just laying around. This one did get released and played a limited run, although it's not said how much money it earned. But before the film ends, we have to find out the true nature of the train and whether or not
Everybody's got something to do. Everybody like you.
yep, they're still singing it. And this is a hard film to judge, but I'll go with a 3 with it. It's not good, but there's something about it that's kind of funny and fascinating once you know the story behind it and see how they're just sort of trying to patch together some story out of all of this. It's probably terrible, but I like watching it anyway. Maybe it's the song. The HCS is a 1.5 since it's still very, very niche, and it's starting to build a cult following, but it's not really that big yet, and maybe after some time it'll have some more sway, but it's not quite there. Should you watch it? Yeah, and then dance with me.
Come on, dance with me, dance with me. Dance and dance with me.
Here's the only one on this block with an unknown date, and we just know that it came out sometime in '85, and it's The Comic. It's set in a future oppressive society, and there's this club that puts on shows, and this guy named Sam who wants to be their comedian. But they've already got one, and he's turned away. So he sticks around and heckles the guy, and then goes to see a psychic about unlocking his suppressed memories, which unlocks some wild fantasies.
I will kill him.
That inspires him, so he goes out and just kills him and drags his body away, and the next night the club needs their comic. Well, of course, Sam is there, and they reluctantly let him take the spot, and he does pretty well, and after the show, meets up with a prostitute. But then, he's haunted by nightmares and continues on with the performances, signing up with a manager and seeing Anne on a regular basis. But as he becomes more successful, things start to go sour with Anne, and their relationship becomes more and more troubled, and they have a baby, and he gets her a job dancing at the club. But death and danger await. And this is a weird one, and I wasn't sure where to put it, because it feels maybe more sci-fi than horror, but most of the sites out there listed as horror first, so that's where I placed it. It was both written and directed by Richard Driscoll, and it was his first film, and he'd actually go on to a long career in a variety of genres, and even just made a film last year, an animated piece called The Adventures of Mickey, Sherlock Mouse, and Winnie the Pooh, just taking advantage of that public domain stuff, I guess. Oh, the weird thing is that he's also an actor, and when he does that, he goes by the name Stephen Crane instead, and would often star in his own films. Seems like this was made in '85 and had some sort of video release, and didn't get a release to a broader public until 1990 in the UK at an event called Splatterfest, where it was booed loudly. The reception was so poor that they had planned a Q&A with Driscoll afterwards, but decided to scrap it. And they also canceled a screening of another of his films and replaced it with Evil Dead 2. People derided the weird performances, the lack of any comedy, and the fact that a portion of the film didn't seem to be in focus. It also seems to heavily borrow elements from the X-rated Cafe Flesh in terms of the general aesthetic. It went on to have a reputation as one of the worst movies ever made, but also developed a cult following for its surreal nature and the general "what the hell am I looking at" vibes. And this is definitely weird, but it's also not good. It's a 1.5. I do think that there's interesting things happening somewhere in here, and it's really trying to capture a mood, but it's just not succeeding in any meaningful way, and the story is just a mess. The HCS is just A1 because not even its rep for being bad has earned it more recognition, so it's just stuck in a little corner of obscurity. Should you watch it? I'd say likely not, unless you just want something weird and unusual, even if it's not that engaging. Brace yourself for this next one because we have a film that's debuted in Japan and Mexico on March 10th, but didn't get a US release until August of '86, and it's Faces of Death 3. It starts with a camera crew in a police car, like a proto-cops or something, and they're investigating a murderer that's preying on the city's homeless, and we see multiple bodies in the dumpster. And to clarify, this is not real footage. This stuff and the interviews with locals about the killer were filmed for the movie. And you may note that the version that I'm using here looks weird, and it's because it's the most recent release, and it appears as if they've used one of those AI upscalers on the footage to make it look sharper, but instead it looks like some sort of weird mosaic. There's also a trial for a rapist, and they show a piece of evidence that's a videotape he shot in one of his crimes. And again, none of this is real, and in fact, the man on trial is the director, John Alan Schwartz. Police shoot a man in his apartment, again, not real. And then there's a shootout with drug runners where one is killed. So, to point out, this movie is 90 minutes long, and this is about a third of the way into it, and nothing has been real. So if you're afraid of seeing actual death, so far, there's nothing to worry about. There's a PCP freakout where the actor is hilariously bad, but when we get to the half-hour mark, there is some race car crash footage and some footage of a croc attack that's meant to be a human, and it's supposed to be a parachutist who's landed in a crocodile-infested area. But again, you don't see what the crocs are eating, and it's cut so quick with multiple edits, so it's clearly faked, and just the animal's eating some other animal and not a person. And yeah, it's just an assortment of recreations and mock situations meant to look real, but without much of a budget to make it look that way. Now, there is some heart surgery stuff that's likely real. But then there's a freaking exorcism. That's somehow less convincing than anything else. But then there's a suicide jumper, and in case you think that's real, well, that's John Alan Schwartz again. This time not in the brown face that he was in earlier, and one of the silliest dummy drops I've seen. And yeah, I have to say, this series' reputation is kind of hilarious because I've not been looking forward to watching this because I don't care for the real stuff. I watch horror for fake violence, not real ones. But this is just goofy. But it stirred up a bunch of controversy, and animal rights groups protested its release, and it ended up getting banned from a large number of video stores because of it. But come on, there's a section of this film devoted to Bigfoot, so I'm not sure what all the fuss was about. And what a bore. It's a 1.5. It doesn't live up to its hype, and instead just plays out like a whole bunch of weird melodrama. There's a smattering of fun bits because of how silly it plays out, but it's mostly just a number of moments of trying to look real and failing miserably. The HCS is a 2, since of course it's a well-known series, but this entry isn't, and was sort of shunted away back in the day, and has never gained as much interest as the other ones preceding it. Should you watch it? Not really, no.
Get out of this fucking camera. Who are you? Get this camera out of here.
How you doing,
Get that
Willie?
camera out of here.
Our final film for this block is the big one, and what better way to end this than with a film that came out on March 22nd, a Friday for sure, but the 22nd isn't the 13th, but it's Friday the 13th, A New Beginning, or Friday the 13th Part 5, A New Beginning. It starts with a returning little Tommy Jarvis, once again played by the Feld Dog, and he goes to Jason's grave, only to see a pair of guys dig it up. And of course, the man's not quite dead, and kills them. He then comes after Tommy, but it's just a dream, and the kid's now grown up, as we have a rather large time jump. It's now around 5 years or so later, and Tommy's been in an institution and is now being transferred to a halfway house out in the countryside. It's being run by Pamela and Matthew, and they throw this record of his treatment up on screen, which completely disrupts the series' timeline and makes my regular job kinda difficult. There's also a kid there, Reggie the Reckless, and it's Dudley, but I guess Shavar Ross was also Buckwheat for a while in the early 80s? There's a collection of other kids there, and they cause some trouble with the neighbors, who are these like hillbilly characters, like these Deep South parodies of characters that I guess live in the outskirts of New Jersey and are constantly covered in stains. Meanwhile, there's also Goofy Joey here, and we just saw him desperate for a pizza in They're Playing with Fire.
No, we're going to the pub. I gotta eat a pizza. Okay.
And he's equally all about food here. But did you know that Dominic Brascia also directed and he made Evil Laugh and Hard Rock Nightmare? Well, he pisses off Suicide, and he does have some punk stuff on, so maybe it's not just the costume. Maybe it really is a way of life, but not like a big way yet. Well, Vic kills Joey, and the ambulance drivers show up, and for some reason, this one seems to take things really hard. But maybe Roy just has a weak stomach. That night, though, it seems like someone's out there killing people. And when I say people, I mean two guys that for some reason have stumbled out of a 50s greaser movie. But it seems like Tommy has himself a violent streak, so maybe he was responsible. When they find the Jets, or maybe they were sharks.
You talking to me, Sheriff?
No, Roy, but thank you for reminding me that you're in the movie. For some reason, the police say it couldn't possibly be Jason because he was cremated and his body is now ash, which I guess will be important later, but then it happens. The scene that awoke a generation of young lovers of attractive women and inspired an awesome music video from Wolfie's Just Fine, and it's all thanks to the aptly named Debbie Sue Voorhees. But that's not all the memorable moments, since we also meet Reggie's older brother, Demon, also known as Spider, with one of the most famous lines from the entire franchise.
Oh,
Hey, you okay?
oh, some damn enchiladas!
But as our killer makes his way through the teens, is Jason indeed back? Or is Tommy actually doing the killing? Or is it another, perhaps slightly too obvious, other character? So, you'd think that this movie couldn't exist, considering that we've already covered Friday the 13th, the final chapter, and it's against the law to make a sequel to a film you've already said is the last one. But those rebels did it anyway. But with how well Part 4 did, of course they had to bring the series back, but figure out a way to do it without Jason. They brought in Danny Steinman to direct, and we've seen him on the project back in '80 with The Unseen, but he also did Savage Streets before this, and also an adult film called High Rise. Because of this, the film took on a grimier, sleazier tone that wasn't present in the earlier ones, and the director claims they shot so much nudity for the scene in the woods that it might as well have been a porno. This would be his final film though, since the things he was set to handle after this one never came to fruition, and then he was in a motorcycle accident that left him unable to direct. The budget was just over $2 million, the same as Part 4, and it was released in a weekend with a bunch of competition, with Porky's Revenge, The Last Dragon, and Baby's Secret of the Lost Legend all coming out. It took the #1 spot, but then quickly fell and only earned around $22 million, which was still a huge profit, but a big drop down from the two previous entries. Critics trashed it like they did all the Friday films, but fans were angry as well at the lack of Jason, and plans to continue the series with Tommy as the villain were dropped. Of course, the franchise would continue after this, with the next installment arriving just 1 year later, and due to the uproar with this one, Mr. Voorhees was returned to life.
Ooh, baby. Hey, baby. Hey, baby.
Ooh, baby, ooh, baby, ooh, baby.
And man, I do not care that people don't like this one because of no Jason. It's a 4 from me. I don't care that the real dude isn't there. This is everything I want from a Friday film, and that griminess works in its favor. It's got fun characters, a high body count, a return to the mystery aspect of the first two, even if it's a little easy to figure out, and it's damn fun. The HCS is a 4 since it's a part of one of the biggest franchises in horror and one of the most notorious entries. Plus, it's the film that established Jason as a slow-walking killer that's still caught up to his prey. Should you watch it? Yep, or else you'll make Reggie scream. So there you have it. 85 is in full swing now that we have a Friday film, but I think there's another franchise making an entry a little bit later on that might be even bigger. But yeah, my favorite on this block is A New Beginning. I love it. I think it's great. I think it's everything I want from a Friday film. I know it gets a lot of flack because it doesn't actually feature Jason, but come on. If it wasn't for one shot near the ending, it's a movie about Jason. So I enjoy the hell out of it. Let me know what you think down below. What's your favorite? Which of these have you seen? Which of these would you now like to see? Tell me that down below in the comments. I also want to know if you like this video. If you do, hit that thumbs up button to let me know. If you like the channel, please consider subscribing to it and hitting the bell to get notified when videos go live. And also, maybe check out my Patreon page, patreon.com/movietimelines, where you can help support this channel and keep it going. But yep, 85 is in full swing, and we're going to move right through this year and chug along right here on the 80s Project.